You have had a chance to go around the world, and you have some photos here.
Yeah, so these photos were taken during one of my trips to China some years ago. This picture is inside a Walmart in a city in China. And the reason I took the photo is you'll see that they've got some, I believe it was dried shrimp in this case, piled up on the table. What I thought was interesting is you can see the shopper there has got his hands in, he's selecting what he wants, and just thought it was interesting that the product that they're selling is piled up, exposed as it is, and then the sample container is off to the left there with a cover on it so it doesn't get dirty. So I thought it was a bit backwards. So this is a different view of the same thing, just showing how everything's piled up. And I thought what was interesting here is the Chinese, because of their culture, they buy things in bulk as we might at a farmer's market. But you can see on the left of this picture, one of the workers is taking a sealed, vacuum-packed package of this product, opening it and dumping it out on the table so that people can think they're buying it in bulk rather than buying it in the safe packaged format that we would be accustomed to in North America. Here you see a variety of chicken wings, uncooked chicken wings available for sale. Again, people can go and pick what they want. And you can see at the end of that row, there's a woman with her daughter in the shopping cart, and the little girl has her bare hand going into the raw chicken, playing with it. And who knows if they're going to buy it or not. It's just, from a North American perspective, of course, unsanitary, but it's customary there. And then this is a restaurant I went to. It was a seafood restaurant, and you're looking at the menu. All of the fish and shellfish is live in tanks, and you go up with your waitress and you point out what fish you want, either what type of fish, or if it's a larger fish, you can actually pick the individual fish and tell them how you'd like it prepared. And this is the other part of the menu. If you don't like fish, you can get different kinds of birds. Again, everything's live, very fresh, until it's cooked for you. And while that might be abhorrent to people in North America because people aren't accustomed to seeing their food fresh from the farm, so to speak, everything in China is presented fresh, in large part because up until recently they didn't have refrigeration as we do widespread in North America. And one of the things I found as I travel is that wherever I go in the world, the airports, the office parks, and the hotels all seem to look the same. What changes is the food. And I find that very interesting. And I'm a fairly adventurous eater. I will eat whatever's put in front of me, provided my host will eat it. I may not like it, but if it's safe to eat, I'll at least try it. So I've eaten some very strange things.
Such as?
Well, one of the things I tell people that is shocking to a lot of people in North America is that I've eaten live shrimp. The way it's prepared is that these are very small shrimp, perhaps 2 to 2.5 inches long, including the head, so very small. And they take a few dozen of them, they put them into a bowl with rice wine, and they let it sit for 10 or 15 minutes, and the shrimp literally get drunk. And when they stop kicking around, you can pick them up with chopsticks, put one in your mouth and eat it. They're so small that you can chew up the shell. And it's actually very good. I know a lot of people are probably grimacing at thinking of putting a whole live shellfish in your mouth that's still alive. But it's very good, and you have to realize that the reason you might not like that is what's in your head, not what's in your stomach. You know, it's just our cultural differences that we're not accustomed to doing things like that.
Here's the language.
Yes.
And obviously we're talking about some characters here.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I'm more visual than I am listening to the language. So these are some Chinese written characters that I've learned. So China doesn't have an alphabet like we have in English. In English, the alphabet is, each letter is a phonetic representation of the sound used to make the word. In China, rather than doing that, they have what they call ideograms. So each symbol represents an idea or a thing rather than a word, and there's no direct connection between the written language and the spoken language. So you can be completely fluent in speaking Chinese and not be able to read a word of it, and at the same time you could be very fluent in reading Chinese but not be able to speak a word of it because there's no connection between the two. So looking at these characters, you'll see number 1 there is the symbol for woman. And I learned that the development of the character over the thousands of years, it's supposed to look like a woman striding forward with her arms out, if you can sort of visualize that. And then number 2 is another character. And again, we talked about how the Chinese culture and language, or Asian cultures, I should say, is a context-sensitive language. And the characters here can have a different meaning based on the syntax or where the character is located in the sentence. So the number 2 character sitting by itself can mean either baby, and the way it's visualized is that you've got the baby's head at the top with the 2 arms sticking out, and then the swaddled legs with a cloth wrapped around it at the bottom. So again, it can be made baby, but in a different context, it can be small. And in my business, which is a very technical business, if we're talking about the size of a part, it could be a small part, and the same character could be used to describe the size of a part. And then if you go on to the number 3 there, you'll see it's a combination of the first 2. So when the Chinese or Asian languages are trying to express a more complex idea, they'll take the 2 simple characters, numbers 1 and 2, and combine them.
Does it mean small woman? I don't know.
So in this case, you see woman and baby.
Right.
And what that character with the 2 together means harmony. So if you think of woman and child, it's a very romantic idea to have harmony. So the number 3 means harmony, not woman and child. And then if you look at number 4, again, you'll see on the left-hand side that same woman character, and next to it is what sort of looks like a reverse letter E. So that's the symbol for broom. It's woman and broom together.
Okay.
And then you have to imagine, what could the Chinese culture or language mean when they put woman and broom together? It means wife. And you realize it's a 5,000-year-old language that gets a lot of people in North America who are feminists upset, perhaps, but that's what it means.
But back in the day.
And that's what it meant back in the day. That's right. And then lastly, the number 5 character, you'll see it's in this case, 2 different characters as well. So the top portion of it, which looks sort of like a Japanese pagoda roof, actually does symbolize a roof. And then the character underneath is supposed to be a pig. And you can sort of see the image of a pig laying on its side with his legs sticking out. Mm-hmm. And that means wealth, because back then, if you had a roof and an animal, you were considered wealthy.
The other thing we want to talk about finally as we wrap up today is ethics and working abroad. And I think you say it best in terms of what you've learned through the years.
Yeah, I try to acknowledge certainly the ethics and culture of the country in which I'm doing business, but I'm sometimes constrained by the laws that apply to me as a U.S. citizen. And an example of that is a contract I was working on years ago with a cell phone manufacturer in China. And we had a factory in China at the time, and we had built our factory there next to their factory so we could be a very responsive supplier, and we were trying to win a piece of business. And we certainly had the best price, the best quality, best service since we were located next to them, but that wasn't enough. Whereas in the U.S. you might refer to something as money under the table or a bribe, in China it was money over the table. They were very open about it, saying that regardless of the quality of our offer, they wanted a cash payment, what I would call a bribe, but they wouldn't, in order to win that contract. They would call it a red envelope in China because on birthdays and holidays, they would present money to children or whomever in a red envelope as a gift. And these business contacts I had with major customers would hand me an envelope and tell me how much to put in it if I wanted to win that business. Unfortunately, being a public U.S. company, we couldn't do that, and there were several instances in which we lost the business because we weren't willing to pay those bribes. But in China, that was the normal way of doing business 20 years ago. It's not so much the same today. There's been a big influence on trying to do business the Western way, if you will, and have more ethics. That applies not only to winning contracts, as I just discussed, but even to things like intellectual property and honoring patents.
So we do thank you for being with us today. And do you have one last piece of advice for students as they deal with culture in the business world?
I would say just try to be clear and be well-intentioned in your communication to whoever you're talking to, and try to see things from their perspective. Know your audience.
Thanks very much. Doug Breskin with us today. And that wraps up Chapter 3, Intercultural Communication.